In June 2014, a 47-year-old Las Vegas resident named Kenny Veach left a comment under a video about Area 51. He wrote that during one of his hikes in the Mojave Desert, he found a cave with an entrance that looked like a perfect capital letter M. When he tried to go inside, his whole body began to vibrate, and the closer he got to the entrance, the stronger the vibration became. He got scared and ran away. The comment went viral. Some demanded proof, while others accused him of lying. Kenny returned to the desert, filmed a video, but couldn't find the cave. Subscribers mocked him. So, he promised to go back, this time with a pistol, adding, "If I don't come back, then I died doing what I love." On November 10th, 2014, Kenny Veach left his home and headed for the sheep range, deep in the heart of the Mojave Desert. 40 miles north of Las Vegas, with no roads, no trails, and no cell service, just scorching rock, abandoned mines without barriers, and a silence so heavy it makes your ears ring. 30 rescuers combed the area 3 times. A helicopter flew over the canyons. All they managed to find was his mobile phone, neatly placed on a rock at the entrance to a vertical mine shaft. What drove Kenny Veach on his final hike? Pressure from the internet? The thrill of exploration? Or a decision he made long before he left his house? Kenneth Lee Veach was born in 1967 in Las Vegas to a police officer. His father served on the city police force for 30 years. When Kenny was about 20, his father took his own life. This event would tear the family apart, and the rift would run through the rest of Kenny's life. He would feud with his brother Raymond for years, and the number of close people around him would dwindle. By age 46, Kenny lived alone in Las Vegas and ran a YouTube channel under a nickname he adopted after being bitten by a rattlesnake. The channel was small, videos from desert hikes, footage of abandoned mines, and encounters with wildlife. Kenny filmed tarantulas, desert tortoises, and bighorn sheep with massive curled horns. He caught snakes with his bare hands for fun and didn't hide it. For over 20 years, he went on solo hikes through the Mojave and Great Basin deserts. His style was deliberately ascetic. He refused to take a GPS, didn't use a compass, and didn't carry maps. He slept on mountain peaks under the open sky without a tent. He intentionally brought minimal water and food to, as he put it, test his limits. Once it nearly cost him his life. His left knee gave out on a trail. He had only 1 cup of water left for a 20-mile trek in temperatures over 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and he had to be evacuated by helicopter. But even after that, he didn't change his habits. Kenny didn't treat the desert as a place for a stroll, but as a space where he felt he belonged. In one video he said, "I hike mountain ranges where most people wouldn't dare to climb. I've been in so many caves I can't count them. I play with rattlesnakes for entertainment." About a year before he disappeared, Kenny quit his job. He decided to become an independent inventor. He developed a new model of a toilet paper holder, submitted it to the quirky platform, and tried to get on the TV show Shark Tank. Both times he was rejected. The money ran out and his savings were spent. He tried to sell his house under unusual terms, keeping the right to live in it as a handyman. No buyers were found. Kenny suffered from clinical depression. He refused to take medication and didn't see doctors. His girlfriend, Sherian Pilgrim, later said that he shared thoughts of suicide with her. Once, he told her that if he ever decided to go through with it, he would go so far into the desert that he would never be found. The sheep range stretches for about 56 miles across southern Nevada. It is part of the largest national wildlife refuge in the continental United States, the Desert National Wildlife Refuge, covering nearly 1.5 million acres. That is larger than the territory of some European countries. Despite its proximity to Las Vegas, the area is completely wild. There are no roads, no marked trails, no trash. The terrain consists of limestone canyons, where the walls narrow so much you can touch both sides at once, and vertical shafts of abandoned mines left over from the gold rush. The mines are neither fenced nor marked. A drop-off can open up right under your feet, just past a rock ledge. According to some reports, the military previously used some of these shafts to dump chemical waste. The area had another reputation. Nevada police had repeatedly found bodies there that were unrelated to tourism or accidents. To the west of the Sheep Range, past the Pintwater and Spotted Ranges, lies a testing and military training zone adjacent to Nellis Air Force Base. Area 51, located near Groom Lake, is by various estimates 32 to 128 kilometers from where Kenny hiked. The distance is significant, but for those following his story online, the proximity to a military facility would become a key element of future theories. It was here, in the Joe May Canyon area, that Kenny hiked most often. He knew this terrain better than most professional rescuers. In October 2014, after a wave of skeptical comments, Kenny set out on his second hike in search of the M Cave. He took a camera with him, filmed the entire route, and on October 18th uploaded a video titled M Cave Hike. The footage shows him walking through canyons, bypassing vertical shafts, and encountering a black bighorn sheep on a slope. He didn't find the cave. Comments poured in under the video. Some wrote that he made it all up. Others demanded he go back. One comment stood out from the rest. A user wrote, "No, don't go back there. If you find the entrance to that cave, don't go inside. You won't come back out." Kenny replied to his subscribers that he would return, this time with a pistol. He said he would be better prepared. A few days before his final hike, Kenny typed a phrase into his browser's search bar: "Help me, help me, help me." The search history was saved on his computer. On November 10th, 2014, early in the morning, Kenny called Sherian. According to some reports, he was at a Las Vegas movie theater at the time. He said he was going on a short hike for 2 nights and 3 days. He didn't name the exact location. He didn't leave any coordinates. He got into his white Honda CR-V SUV and drove north to the familiar parking lot at the trailhead near Joe May Canyon. In the car, as usual, a cooler with beer for the trip back was waiting for him. But this time, he didn't take his video camera. He didn't take his GoPro. He didn't take the GPS navigator, which he hadn't used before anyway, but which at least stayed at home. He didn't take a hiking backpack, extra water, or food. Of all his things, he only had his mobile phone and a 9mm Ruger pistol. Sherian waited for his call after 3 days. The call didn't come. She called him herself. The phone didn't answer. She tried again, then again. Silence. A day passed, then a second. On November 17th, a week after he left, Sherian contacted the police. By that time, Kenny Veach had already been gone for 7 days. In the Mojave Desert in November, temperatures can rise above 86 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and drop to 32 degrees Fahrenheit at night. Without water or shelter, no one survives here for 7 days. On November 17th, 2014, when Sherian Pilgrim's report reached the Clark County Police, Kenny Veach had already been missing for a week. For the Mojave Desert, a week is the point after which the chances of finding a person alive drop to 0. The delay itself would later raise questions. Kenny left on November 10th, promising to return in 3 days. When he didn't answer calls on the 13th, Sherian began to worry but waited. She knew his habit of staying in the desert longer than planned and was used to the fact that there was no service in the mountains. Another day passed, then another. Only on the 17th did she go to the police. By then, a whole week had passed, and in those 7 days, the desert had done its work. The wind had erased tracks in open areas. The nightly temperature swings and daytime heat had accelerated the decomposition of all organic matter, and scavengers, from coyotes to vultures, are capable of completely destroying soft tissue on the surface within a few days. The police started by checking the usual routes. Sherian pointed out the area where Kenny usually parked his car and described his white Honda CR-V. A patrol found the vehicle in the parking lot at the trailhead near Joe May Canyon. The car was unlocked. Inside, on the back seat, was a cooler with beer, untouched. The keys, apparently, were with Kenny. Coordinators brought in Red Rock Search and Rescue, one of the most experienced volunteer units in the region. Dave Cummings took command of the operation. At the same time, official representatives of the state of Nevada joined the search. The problem was the territory. The sheep range is not a park with marked trails and stationary checkpoints. It is over 600 square miles of wild land, cut through by canyons and vertical drop-offs. Kenny could have gone in any direction. He left no route, no coordinates, and no note. The only lead was the area where his car was parked and Sherian's knowledge of where he usually hiked. The first search raid unfolded within a few days of the report. More than 30 people went into the desert in foot teams. K-9 units worked with them. Dogs trained to track in dry, rocky terrain. A helicopter flew over the canyons, scanning open areas from the air. Rescuers divided the territory into squares and combed them methodically, sector by sector. Every canyon, every side ravine, every crevice was checked for traces: clothing, gear, footprints in the dirt. In the narrow limestone canyons, where the walls come together within arm's reach, the groups moved in single file. The sun flooded the upper edges of the cliffs, but down below, at the bottom of the canyons, lay cool shadows, and the sound of footsteps on gravel reflected off the walls with a short, dry echo. Vultures circled overhead. They always circle over these places, and their presence means nothing. But every time a bird descended, someone in the group would look up. Work proceeded from dawn till dusk. In November, nighttime temperatures dropped low enough to make being outdoors without gear dangerous. And the search teams knew that if Kenny was still alive and out there without shelter, he was running out of time. The mines presented a unique challenge. There are dozens in the area, and most aren't on any map. Vertical shafts dozens of feet deep can be hidden behind a rock ledge or scree, and you might only spot them when you're right on top of them. Peering into everyone, checking everyone, that's a job that, in this terrain, stretches on for weeks. There were no results. Not a boot print, not a scrap of fabric, not a scent for the dogs to pick up and follow. The first sweep ended without a single lead. A second outing was organized. Then a third. Each time the searchers expanded the perimeter, moving further from the car and checking increasingly remote sections of the ridge. A helicopter made another pass. The dogs worked from the parking area deeper into the territory, trying to detect any direction the man might have moved. Dave Cummings, who led the operations, later described the situation briefly. They tracked Kenny's route as far as they could, but past a certain point, the tracks vanished completely. In the desert, rocky ground doesn't hold prints well, and in a week, the wind can erase even the ones that remain. On November 22nd, the 12th day after Kenny disappeared, the search team found his mobile phone. It was lying on a rock, not in a crevice, not in the dust, not among rock debris. On a rock, in plain sight, about a 4-hour hike from where the car was parked. Next to the phone was the open entrance to a deep vertical shaft of an abandoned mine. Kenny knew this shaft. He had filmed it at the beginning of his October video, M-Cave Hike. He walked up to the edge, looked down, and commented on its depth. In the footage, you can see him standing right at the brink, the camera looking into the void, its walls plunging vertically into the darkness. Rusty rock debris sticks out of the ground around it like teeth. The coordinates of the find matched the coordinates of the shaft from the video. It was the very spot he passed every time he set out in search of this M-cave. For the searchers, it meant one thing. Kenny had returned to a familiar place. He hadn't gotten lost or wandered off course. He had come specifically here, to a shaft he knew, and where he had stopped. The searchers lowered specialized cameras into the shaft. The equipment allowed them to inspect the bottom and the walls at the full depth. The cameras found no human remains, no clothing fragments, no gear, and no signs of a recent rockfall. The shaft was empty. Cummings commented on the find with restraint. He said they had found the phone next to an old vertical shaft and couldn't find any other traces. According to him, this didn't mean Kenny was at the bottom of the shaft, but the searchers had tracked his movements as far as it was humanly possible. The dogs were brought to the phone. They tried to pick up a trail from that point in any direction. There was no trail. Not toward the canyons, not back to the car, not deeper into the desert. The man had walked to this rock, placed his phone on it, and stopped leaving tracks. This was the first oddity, but not the last. The position of the phone didn't look accidental. It hadn't been dropped, it hadn't fallen out of a pocket, and it wasn't lying in the dust. It was lying on a rock, on a flat surface, right in front of the entrance to a shaft that Kenny knew well and had filmed a month earlier. It looked like a deliberate act, to set it down carefully and walk away. But walk away where? The dogs couldn't find a direction. In a rocky desert where the ground is so dry and hard that it barely holds prints, that's understandable. But there was nothing else with the phone. No pistol, no backpack, no personal belongings of any kind. The 9mm Ruger that Kenny had taken with him on this hike wasn't found near the shaft, inside it, or anywhere in the searched territory. A metal pistol, unlike soft tissue, doesn't decompose or disappear. Coyotes and vultures, capable of destroying biological remains on the desert surface in a matter of days, are indifferent to metal. If Kenny had died somewhere in the open, the pistol should have remained. It wasn't found. When investigators examined Kenny's computer, the picture became more detailed, but no clearer. The browser history contained a search query made a few days before his final hike. "Help me, help me, help me." 3 times in a row, on one line, with no punctuation. It could have been a cry for help addressed to a search engine instead of a living person. It could have been song lyrics or a random string of words. The context in which the query was made remained unknown. Parallel to the official investigation, the internet began forming its own version of events. Subscribers to Kenny's channel noticed his absence. Videos stopped appearing. The comments under M-Cave Hike filled with questions. Where is he? What happened? Did he find the cave? When the first news of his disappearance broke, the discussion spilled over onto Reddit, into podcasts, and into thematic communities dedicated to unsolved cases. It was then that a message appeared in the comments under Kenny's video from a user identifying herself as Sherion Pilgrim, his girlfriend. Sherion confirmed that Kenny was missing. She described the circumstances. He went on a hike, didn't return, search teams combed the area 3 times, and found only the phone by the shaft. But before moving to conclusions, she talked about what he was like in the desert. They hiked together, sometimes for 9 hours a day, exploring abandoned mining towns that tourists in Nevada call ghost towns, and descending into caves and mines. They always prepared thoroughly. They wore snake guards, protective clothing against the sun, took walking sticks, and extra water and food, and they always left an additional supply in the car for the trip back. Kenny was more cautious than he seemed in his videos, where he played with rattlesnakes. On real hikes, he knew what he was doing. And then Sherion wrote something that would turn the discussion upside down. "I don't think Kenny had an accident. I believe he committed suicide, According to her, Kenny had been battling depression for years and refused any help. He didn't take medication. He didn't see doctors. Being fired, the failure of his inventions, and financial ruin had pushed him to a point where he stopped seeing a way out. Sherian said she had asked him directly if he was capable of taking his own life. His father had passed away that exact way, and she wanted to know. Kenny told her that if he ever decided to do it, he would go so far into the desert that no one would ever find him. Sherian was convinced he had left the phone intentionally so he couldn't be tracked by its signal. For the same reason, she believed, he hadn't taken his camera. There was nothing to film because he wasn't planning on returning from this hike. This explanation formed a coherent picture. Depression, financial ruin, refusal of treatment, the phrase about not being found, the abandoned phone, the lack of a camera and GPS. Every element pointed in one direction, but this picture had gaps. If Kenny planned to end his life in the desert, why did he tell his subscribers he would return with proof? Why promise to take a pistol and find the cave? Why leave comments fueling the intrigue around the M cave until the very last day? A person who has decided to die usually doesn't create public commitments for the future. Or do they? Because that's exactly what makes a cover story convincing. And one more question that never found an answer. If Kenny's body is somewhere in the desert, on the surface, or at the bottom of one of the countless shafts, why has not a single fragment been discovered in all the years since? Not a bone, not a scrap of clothing, not the metal pistol, which isn't subject to decay. The Mojave Desert, for all its vastness, is not unpopulated. Tourists, hunters, and military patrols pass through these areas regularly. Dozens of enthusiasts have purposefully combed the area for traces since Kenny's disappearance. Nothing. Meanwhile, opinions within Kenny's family were divided. Sherian was convinced of suicide, but Kenny's brother Raymond and his sister-in-law, Susan Veach, held a completely different view. They didn't believe Kenny was dead, and a person identifying himself online as a relative named Michael Veach went even further. He accused Sherian of emotional pressure on Kenny and claimed that she was the one who drove him to despair. The police, he said, refused to take the family's request for an investigation into a possible crime seriously. The family, which had been split by a years-long feud between the brothers even before the disappearance, was now even more deeply divided. Each side was certain they were right. Each side blamed the other, and neither had any proof. After 3 ground search operations and 1 helicopter sweep, the authorities shut down the active phase of the search. The exact date isn't recorded in open sources, but it happened between late November and December 2014, when it became clear that there were no new leads, and the area had been exhausted. The case was entered into the federal NamUs Missing Persons database. Kenny was assigned an identification number, and the status, presumed dead. The wording meant that the investigation had no grounds to consider him alive, but also no direct evidence of death. The body hadn't been found. The cause of the disappearance hadn't been established. The case wasn't closed, but it wasn't being actively pursued. It had moved into the category law enforcement calls a cold case. Forensic experts and police considered several avenues simultaneously. A lost hiker, a fall into an unexplored shaft, or suicide driven by depression. None of the versions received enough confirmation to close the case. According to available data, the police did analyze his computer. However, according to some family members, digital evidence from the phone wasn't collected in full, and requests from relatives for a deeper investigation into a possible crime were rejected. According to the person identifying as Michael Veach, the police told the family directly, "Kenny is dead in a ravine. Stop calling." For those who knew Kenny, this was a turning point. The hope that he was alive, that he was lost somewhere, that he had just lost contact and was about to emerge onto a road, that hope was gone. Not because evidence of his death had appeared, but because there was no one left to search and nowhere left to look. The search camp was dismantled. The equipment was hauled away. The grid squares on the map, which 30 people had combed through for weeks, became just patches of desert once again. Within a couple of days, the wind had buried the last of the searchers' boot prints under sand and dust. The Sheep Range Canyon returned to silence. The white Honda CR-V was removed from the parking area. The cooler with beer in the back seat remained untouched. There was nothing left on the rock at the mine entrance. The phone was taken by the police. The desert keeps no records. The sand fills in footprints within hours. The wind levels everything that was pressed into the ground, and the sun burns any organic matter into dust. A month after the disappearance, there was not a single sign left in the area that anyone had been searched for there. As if there had been no 30 searchers, no helicopter, no dogs. As if Kenny himself had never existed. When the active search ended and the case was moved to the cold case category, theories began to crystallize around Kenny Veach's disappearance. Each of them relied on real facts, and each had its own weak points. The first and most thoroughly substantiated theory belonged to Sherry-Ann Pilgrim. In her conviction, Kenny committed suicide. The arguments she presented formed a consistent chain. Long-term, untreated clinical depression, refusal of medication, and doctor visits. His father's suicide, which Kenny experienced at age 20, and which by all appearances left a deep mark on him. Financial ruin, being fired, failed inventions, and an attempt to sell his house under impossible conditions. The search query, "Help me, help me, help me," in his browser a few days before he left. And most importantly, Kenny's own direct words that if he ever decided to do it, he would go so far into the desert that he would never be found. Sherry-Ann drew attention to what Kenny did not take with him on his final hike. His video camera and GoPro were left at home. He hadn't used a GPS or compass before, but he always took his camera when he planned to film. If he was going to look for the M cave, why leave the camera behind? The answer, in Sharon's opinion, was simple. He wasn't planning on filming anything. She interpreted the phone left on the rock by the mine as a conscious step to cut off the last channel through which he could be tracked. Critics of this theory pointed to several gaps. The first, the complete absence of a body or any physical remains. In the Mojave Desert, soft tissue does indeed decompose quickly, especially if scavengers get to it. But bones, teeth, metal clothing components, and weapons remain for years. The 9mm Ruger that Kenny took with him was not found in any of the checked mines or on the surface. Over the course of more than 10 years, dozens of enthusiasts have combed the area, and no one has found anything. The second gap, Kenny's behavior before his disappearance. He was actively writing to his subscribers, promising to return with proof, and making plans for a third trip. People who have made the decision to end their lives can behave in different ways, but creating public commitments for the future is rare. However, proponents of the suicide theory countered, this is exactly what makes the cover-up convincing. Promises and plans create the illusion of an intention to return. The second theory, death by the elements or an accident. Kenny could have died from dehydration, heat stroke, hypothermia during the night, or by falling into one of the countless vertical mine shafts scattered across the Sheep Range. The terrain in these parts does not forgive mistakes. A drop-off can be hidden behind a rock ledge, and even an experienced hiker walking at dusk or distracted for a second risks stepping into the void. Kenny, for all his experience, fundamentally did not use navigation, intentionally took minimal water, and had already found himself on the verge of death in these same mountains once before. This theory would well explain the disappearance, if not for one detail, the phone. A person who dies by accident does not place their phone on a rock by a familiar mine. They drop it, leave it in their pocket, or lose it during a fall. A phone neatly placed in a conspicuous spot is an action, not an accident. Proponents of the accident theory countered. The phone could have been left for another reason. For example, Kenny could have drained the battery and placed it by a notable landmark to retrieve it on his way back. Or he could have left it consciously as a marker of his route before heading into an unfamiliar area. And then, something went wrong. The third theory was the most popular on the internet, though the least supported by facts: military intervention. According to this theory, Kenny stumbled upon a secret entrance to an underground facility connected to Nellis Air Force Base, or Area 51, and was eliminated. Conspiracy theorists pointed to two facts. The first, the proximity of Kenny's hiking area to the testing and military training zones. The second, the symptoms he described when approaching the M cave. A vibration of the entire body, increasing as he approached the entrance, and a sudden, inexplicable fear. In the opinion of this theory's supporters, the description exactly matched the effects of infrasonic weapons used by the military for crowd control. Such devices generate low-frequency sound waves, inaudible to the human ear, but which cause nausea, vibration of internal organs, and acute panic. Critics pointed to a number of weak points. Area 51 is located near Groom Lake, 28 to 80 miles from the places where Kenny hiked, and is separated from them by the territory of a national wildlife refuge. Military patrols in the territory adjacent to the testing zone operate openly. Trespassers are detained, fined, and escorted out, but not killed. Not a single confirmed case of the physical elimination of a civilian in the vicinity of Area 51 has ever been recorded. As for the vibration, there was a perfectly scientific explanation for it. Old, unventilated mines and caves in limestone can accumulate carbon dioxide, displacing oxygen. A person entering such a space begins to experience hypoxia, dizziness, nausea, a sensation of vibration in the body, which in medicine is called paresthesia, and a sudden, irrational fear. All the symptoms described by Kenny fit the clinical picture of oxygen deprivation. The sensation was real. Its source could have been completely mundane. The fourth theory was the most unexpected: a staged disappearance. According to this, Kenny Veach did not die, but invented the M cave, faked his disappearance, and went into hiding to escape debts, start a new life, or collect an insurance payout. The main source of this theory was Kenny's sister-in-law, Susan Veach. She claimed that in 2018, 4 years after the disappearance, Kenny broke into her store and stole a tablet. According to her, he was limping on a bad left knee, and the entire scene was recorded by a security camera. Kenny's daughter, upon seeing the recording, initially confirmed that it was her father in the video. Later, she retracted her statement. Proponents of this theory pointed out that Kenny possessed survival skills in the desert, knew the territory well, and theoretically could have planned an exit route, leaving the phone as a false trail. Critics countered. Kenny was registered in the federal NamUs database as a missing person and declared presumed dead. A staging of this scale would have required a complete abandonment of his former identity, documents, and connections. For a person in a financial crisis, without savings and without support, this would have been technically extremely difficult. Furthermore, Kenny was neither a fugitive from justice, nor the holder of large insurance policies, nor involved in anything worth running from. He was an unemployed hiker with an empty bank account and a YouTube channel with a few hundred subscribers. There was one more detail that didn't fit well into any of the theories. The warning. That very comment left by an unknown user under the October video. Don't go back there. If you find the entrance to that cave, don't go in. You won't come back out. The comment could have been a joke, an attempt to stir up fear, a provocation, or something the author knew more about than they were letting on. The identity of this user was never established. None of the 4 theories explained all the facts simultaneously. Each had a gap where logic fell through. The suicide theory didn't explain the absence of the body and the pistol. The accident theory didn't explain the neatly placed phone. The military intervention theory had not a single piece of direct evidence. The staging theory rested on the testimony of one person, which a key witness later retracted. After 2014, the case of Kenny Veach did not disappear. It ceased to be an investigation and became a legend. Official searches were not resumed. The Clark County Police did not allocate new resources, did not conduct repeat sweeps, and did not order additional forensic examinations. The case remained in the NamUs database with its previous status. Missing, presumed dead, no updates. But the internet did not forget. Comments under Kenny's videos continued to accumulate. On Reddit, in communities dedicated to cold cases and missing persons, discussions of his story popped up periodically. Users analyzed every frame of his videos, checked coordinates, plotted routes on maps, and argued about geology and the gas composition of caves. Podcasts returned to the case again and again. Astonishing Legends, Generation Y, the Nevada Triangle. Each time the same facts were retold, new interpretations were added, and old contradictions were discussed. There was an irony in this. Kenny Veach, in his lifetime, was a little-known YouTuber with a small audience. His channel didn't make money, his videos got modest views, and his comment about the M Cave was taken by many as a fabrication. But it was the disappearance that turned him into a figure discussed by millions. Kenny's story became part of the established canon of internet mysteries, alongside the Dyatlov Pass and the Mary Celeste, the very internet that had mocked him and demanded proof while he was alive, turned him into a legend after he vanished. Sherian continued to appear in the comments. She asked people not to risk their lives trying to find the M Cave. She repeated her theory. Kenny committed suicide. She asked to be left alone. Her pleas went unheard. Years after his disappearance, enthusiasts began appearing in the sheep range, following in Kenny's footsteps. They would upload his videos, cross-reference coordinates with maps, plot an approximate route, and head into the desert to search for the M Cave. Some filmed their treks and posted them on YouTube. Dozens of videos, dozens of attempts, and not a single one led to a result that could be considered definitive. One such seeker, a YouTuber named Sean, followed Kenny's route and discovered a rock formation that resembled an M-shaped entrance. The opening was low, no more than 5 feet high, and partially blocked by rocks. Sean reported that as he approached the spot, he felt a sudden, intense physical nausea. He vomited. He caught it all on camera. Whether this was a psychosomatic reaction tied to expectations and nervous tension, or if he truly encountered the same phenomenon Kenny described, remains unknown. Meanwhile, unidentified human remains continued to be found in the Mojave Desert. Each time it sparked a wave of discussion. Could it be Kenny? In November 2024, Clark County Police discovered a male skeleton. Forensic analysis determined the deceased stood between 5 feet, 10 inches, and 6 feet 2 inches. Kenny was 5 feet 8 inches. The skeleton was ruled out. A year later, in November 2025, a human skull was found. Beside it lay bones with fur, which upon inspection turned out to be non-human, belonging to an animal. The skull also did not match Kenny's records. Each such discovery briefly revived hope for an answer, only to extinguish it just as quickly. The desert regularly returned remains to the surface, but among them, there were never any that could close the case. In 2018, Kenny's story took an unexpected turn. A daughter-in-law of Susan Veach claimed she saw him alive in her store. According to her, he burst in, grabbed a tablet, and ran out, limping on his left knee. A security camera captured the incident. Kenny's daughter watched the footage and initially confirmed. It was her father on the video. Later, she retracted that statement. The episode was never confirmed or refuted. As far as is known, the police did not conduct a separate investigation into it. For some, it became proof that Kenny is alive. For others, it was just another manifestation of grief, which causes people to see missing relatives and strangers. On November 28, 2021, an episode of the TV show Real Life Nightmare on HLN was dedicated to the Kenny Veach case. The story moved beyond internet forums and onto broadcast television. Horror filmmakers took notice as well. The movie Horror in the High Desert, filmed in the found footage genre, is partially based on his story. But no documentary, no podcast, and no TV show brought the answer any closer. They only multiplied the questions. In the time between these events, people who might have known more than others passed away. Kenny's mother, his brother Raymond, and his nephew Sean all died between 2020 and 2023. None of them ever found out what happened on November 10th, 2014. To this day, the Kenny Veach case remains open. His file is active in the NamUse database. The status has not changed. Missing, presumed dead. No further official searches are being conducted, but anyone who discovers remains or items in the Sheep Range area can report them using the case file number. Enthusiast hikers still head out on the routes Kenny blazed. They download his videos, check the landmarks, and search for the M Cave. Some want to solve the mystery. Others want to experience what he experienced. The vibration, the fear, the sensation of something that has no name. Still others just want to rack up views. The Mojave Desert, meanwhile, does not change. The Sheep Range stands where it always has. The canyons narrow just as they did 10 years ago. The mines drop vertically into the earth, without fences or warnings. Bighorn sheep with massive horns climb the slopes. Tarantulas cross the rocky scree, and vultures circle in the rising currents of warm air. Nothing here has changed. Somewhere in this territory, a 4-hour hike from the parking lot where a white SUV once sat with a cooler of beer in the back seat, there is a rock. A rock upon which a mobile phone lay on November 22nd, 2014. Next to the rock is a vertical mine shaft, descending into the darkness. Kenny Veach walked past this shaft in October, filmed it, and kept going. In November, he returned to it, left his phone, and walked away. Where he went, no one knows. In Colorado, there are places where you don't take small children. The Poudre River Canyon, wedged between the sheer cliffs of the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forests, is exactly one of those places. The Big South Trail stretches along the riverbed at an altitude of about 8,200 feet above sea level, in a subalpine zone where granite scree slopes rise at a 45-degree angle. And down below, in the narrow throat of the canyon, icy water moves slowly. Mountain lions and bears roam here, and you can lose your footing at every step. On October 2nd, 1999, 3-year-old Jared Atadero found himself on this trail, ran about 100 feet ahead, stopped to chat with some fishermen, and asked, "Are there any bears here?" A few minutes later, his voice faded away. 200 rescuers combed the canyon for a week. A helicopter called in for the search crashed, injuring 5 people. They found nothing. And nearly 4 years later, 2 hikers discovered his sneakers on a steep slope, 550 feet above the trail. They were perfectly clean, without a single scratch, as if someone had carefully removed them from the child's feet and placed them on a rock. A 3-year-old child could not have climbed up there on his own. But if a predator had dragged him there, why wasn't there a single mark on the footwear? Jared Atadero was 3 years old. He was born on January 2nd, 1996 in Colorado. Brown hair, brown eyes, about 3 feet, 3 inches tall, weighing 35 pounds. Lean, active, impatient. The kind of child who doesn't walk but runs, and who needs everything right now. He absolutely hated tying his shoelaces. That morning, he was wearing a long beige and green fleece jacket, blue sweatpants, and white and gray sneakers featuring characters from the cartoon Tarzan. The laces, as usual, were dangling untied. His father, Alan Atadero, was raising 2 children on his own. A former physical education teacher at a Littleton middle school, he and his twin brother, Arlen, owned a small tourist resort, the Poudre River Resort, in the Poudre River Canyon, about an hour's drive west of Fort Collins. The resort stood among a coniferous forest, right by the water. Alan once said he was drawn to the beauty of the canyon, and working at the resort allowed him to be with his children around the clock, from 6 in the morning until 11 at night. He saw it not as work, but as a privilege. Besides Jared, the family included 6-year-old Jocelyn, his older sister. Their mother, Stacy McKissick, lived separately after the divorce. Alan sought support and found it in a local religious group, the Christian Singles Network, which brought together single-believing adults. The group helped him with daily chores and organized joint trips and meetings. By the fall of 1999, the Atadero family was deeply involved in the life of this community. In early October, 11 members of the group arrived at the resort to help Alan prepare it for winter. In return, he offered to let them spend a few nights in nature. On the morning of October 2nd, the group decided to go to a nearby fish hatchery. Jocelyn ran up to her father and asked for permission to go see the fish. Alan agreed. The fish hatchery was a simple, safe place, and among the adults was a close family friend who often looked after the children. 10 minutes later, Jared ran up with the same request. Alan hesitated, but several members of the group assured him they would keep an eye on the boy. He let his son go. The group drove to the fish hatchery, but didn't stay long. For some reason, 11 adults, a 6-year-old girl, and a 3-year-old boy turned around and headed to the Big South Trail, located about 15 miles from the resort. Alan didn't know about this. He had let the children go to see the fish, not to the Subalpine Mountains. The trail begins with a gentle section along the Poudre River, which is called Cache la Poudre here, Powder Stash, after a legend about French fur traders who hid their supplies there 2 centuries ago. The river is narrow, shallow, and slow-moving. The banks are hemmed in by the stone walls of the canyon. On both sides of the trail, the slopes rise steeply, covered with fallen logs, granite boulders, and dense underbrush. The trail enters the Comanche Peak Wilderness, where there is no cell service and no trail markers every 650 feet. For an experienced adult, it's not difficult to hike. For a 3-year-old in untied sneakers, it's a completely different story. It was an impeccable day. Alan later called it one of those magnificent, cloudless autumn days in the Colorado mountains. The sky was clear, the air cool, and the sun warmed through the treetops. Nothing caused any alarm. The group hit the trail around 10 in the morning and almost immediately spread out. Some adults walked faster, others lagged behind. Jared ended up among those moving slowly, and that didn't sit well with him. At some point, he ran ahead, overtaking his subgroup by about 100 feet. Around 11:30 a.m., a mile and a half from the start of the trail, near the second campsite, the boy stopped next to two fishermen. They were surprised to see a 3-year-old child alone, but about 50 to 65 feet behind him, they noticed a group of adults and assumed the boy was with them. Jared asked his question about bears, received an answer that no bears had been seen nearby, and continued down the trail. The fisherman remembered that he was moving quickly. That was the last time anyone outside the group saw him. Shortly after meeting the fisherman, Jocelyn and several adults heard a shout. The 6-year-old sister described it as playful, like someone had run up to him to play tag. There was no fear in that shout, no pain, just the sound of a child who was happy about something or had seen someone. He was never heard from again. By 12:15 p.m., the adults in the group realized they couldn't see the boy. He wasn't in front. He wasn't behind. They walked along the trail in both directions, looking behind boulders, calling his name. The echo returned from the stone walls, but there was no answer. They searched on their own for about an hour. Then part of the group returned to the resort to inform the father. Nearly 2 hours passed between the moment Jared was last seen and the moment his father learned he was missing. Those 2 hours would later become one of the most painful questions for everyone involved in the case. Alan heard the news in his car. He later recalled screaming the same phrase over and over. "They lost my baby. They lost my baby." He drove to the trail himself, ran about a quarter mile along it, was stunned by the scale of the terrain, and returned to the start to make sure Jocelyn was safe. At 4 p.m., Alan and the resort manager contacted the rescue service. At 4:26 p.m., the call reached Deputy Sheriff Bill Nelson. He later said he expected to finish the search by midnight. "Yes, it's a small child, but I thought we'd go in there with our people and be done by midnight." By 6:30 p.m., there were about 65 rescuers on the trail. By 8 p.m., 2 search teams met on the trail. Neither of them had found a single trace of the 3-year-old boy. The Poudre River Canyon has one entrance and one exit. The walls on either side are sheer. The trail stretches along the water, and the only way to leave it is either back toward the start or up the slope. A 3-year-old child in untied sneakers on a mountain slope at night in October, with temperatures dropping below 32 degrees Fahrenheit by morning. Everyone understood that time was of the essence. At 7 a.m. on October 3rd, the search resumed. K-9 units took to the trail, 12 teams with dogs of various breeds, bloodhounds for tracking, German shepherds for combing the area. Divers arrived to examine the Poudre River along the entire length of the canyon. Helicopters took to the air at dawn. By noon, dozens of rescuers were working on the trail and the surrounding slopes, and by October 5th, their number had grown to 200. The scale of the operation matched the scale of the alarm. A 3-year-old child in a subalpine canyon, one night in the open, at temperatures near freezing. Every hour without a result made the outlook increasingly grim. Search lines combed strips along the trail, descended to the river, and climbed the slopes. The K-9 units worked from the second campsite where Jared was last seen, fanning out into sectors. The voices of rescuers calling the boy's name carried through the canyon and echoed off the stone walls. The dogs picked up a scent and almost immediately lost it. The bloodhounds tracked confidently from the spot where the boy had talked to the fisherman, but after a few dozen yards they would stop. The trail would vanish on the path, not leading into the forest, not to the river, and not up the slope. The handlers switched dogs, started over, and tried from different points. The result was the same. Jared's scent ended on the trail, at a point beyond which there were no branches or forks. The dogs would just stand there and refuse to move further. When divers examined the Poudre riverbed for several miles. The river in this area is shallow and slow, with clear water. The current is weak, the bottom is rocky, and visibility is acceptable. a child weighing 35 pounds could have been shifted by the current along the bottom, but not carried far or hidden. The divers found neither a body, nor clothing, nor footwear. The river was clear. The disappearance of a 3-year-old child in the Colorado mountains had by then already attracted the attention of the press. Dozens of television trucks pulled up to the canyon. Journalists reported live from the start of the trail. The case was compared to the story of John Benet Ramsey, the 6-year-old girl from Boulder murdered 3 years earlier. And that comparison spoke volumes. Colorado was going through another child tragedy, and the public demanded answers. Following the journalists, psychics, a local shaman, and people claiming they could find the boy using unconventional methods flocked to the canyon. In the afternoon of October 3rd, an event occurred that changed the course of the entire operation. A military Huey helicopter, model UH-1N, called in from Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming to support the search from the air, lost altitude over the canyon. The aircraft was flying low along the riverbed, and at one point clipped the treetops. Around 3:30 p.m., the helicopter fell from a height of about 100 feet, about 30 meters, into a wooded area near the trail. 5 crew members sustained serious injuries. The rescuers who had been searching for the 3-year-old boy until that moment were immediately redirected to evacuate the wounded. Several hours of critical time were spent pulling the crew from the wreckage and getting the victims to the hospital. The search operation didn't stop completely, but it lost momentum and manpower exactly when they were needed most. For Alan Atadero, the helicopter crash was yet another blow. His son was somewhere in the canyon. The second night was closing in, and a portion of the search and rescue team was now occupied with an entirely different mission. By October 5th and 6th, with nearly 200 people working the trail simultaneously, the search team discovered tracks in the damp soil near the path. Initially, they were identified as a child's footprints, located right next to prints resembling those of a cat. This discovery immediately gave rise to the theory of a mountain lion attack. A puma, a large predator native to the Colorado mountains, capable of silently stalking its prey, killing it with a single bite to the neck and dragging the carcass to a safe distance. However, by October 6th, experts from the Colorado Division of Wildlife re-evaluated the prints. They weren't cat tracks, they were bear tracks. The mountain lion theory, having just emerged, was left hanging in the air without confirmation, but it wasn't dismissed either. Relations between the Atadero family and Larimer County Sheriff Justin Alderden were strained from the very first days. Alan wanted to involve as many people as possible in the search, including volunteers from among his friends and family. The sheriff refused. Moreover, according to the family's recollections, Alderden warned that he would arrest anyone who attempted to conduct independent searches in the closed-off zone. For a father whose son had been somewhere in the canyon for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th day, this sounded unbearable. Alan later said, "2 days ago they told me that if we didn't find him in 2 days, they would bring in 60 more people. And my question is, if this were your son, why would you wait 2 days?" According to some reports, Atadero's relatives did manage to infiltrate the search zone, posing as a group of birdwatchers. They combed parts of the slopes on their own, but they didn't find anything either. The canyon yielded not a single clue, as if the 3-year-old boy had truly ceased to exist the moment he stepped out of the fisherman's sight. By October 8th, 6 days after the disappearance, the weather turned. Clear autumn days gave way to a cold front. It started to rain, then snow. The temperature dropped, visibility decreased, and the trails became slick. Working on the slopes became dangerous. That same evening, Sheriff Alderden held a press conference and announced the suspension of active search efforts. 6 days of work, 200 rescuers, 12 K-9 teams, divers, and helicopters. The result? No body, no clothing, no shoes, not a single item belonging to Jared Atadero. The only tracks found turned out to be bear prints that were initially mistaken for cat tracks. The dogs never explained where the boy's scent had gone. The river yielded nothing. The slopes were empty. For the sheriff's office, this meant a dead end. For Alan Atadero, it meant that the search for his son had been abandoned. The case was moved to cold case status. A sign was posted at the trailhead of the Big South Trail with a description of the clothes Jared was wearing that day, along with a request for hikers to report any found items. This was the only trace the search operation left behind. Not a body, not evidence, but a sign with a request. The investigation also interviewed all members of the Christian Singles Network, the fisherman who had spoken to Jared on the trail, and Alan's ex-wife. A kidnapping theory was investigated. Access routes to the canyon were studied, and drivers who had passed by on the highway that day were questioned. The canyon has only one entrance and one exit by road, and the walls on either side are sheer. The sheriff's office concluded that it would have been extremely difficult to remove a child from the canyon unnoticed. Autumn passed, then winter. Snow blanketed the canyon, and the trail closed until spring. Then the next spring passed, the next summer, the next autumn, and another winter, and another spring. The trail lived its normal life. Tourists arrived. Fishermen caught trout in the Pudra, and the foliage changed from green to gold and back again. The sign at the entrance faded in the sun. For 3 years and 8 months, the canyon kept its silence. In early June 2003, 2 businessmen, Rob Osborne and Gareth Watts, went on a hike in the Pudra Canyon area. They weren't on the main trail, but higher up, on a steep slope above the Big South Trail. At an elevation of approximately 550 vertical feet above the spot where Jared was last seen, about 170 meters vertically, they stumbled upon a child's shoe. They were white and gray sneakers featuring characters from the movie Tarzan, a Disney Tarzan model, child size. Gareth Watts later described their condition in one phrase. It was in pristine condition, as if someone had just pulled their foot out of it. The sneakers were lying on a 45-degree slope among granite boulders and fallen trees. According to experts, the climb up from the trail took an adult 30 to 35 minutes of scrambling. By forensic calculations, the distance along the incline was about 780 feet. A 3-year-old child could not physically have made such a climb on his own, especially in untied sneakers over rocks and fallen logs. Near the sneakers, they found Jared's blue sweatpants. They were completely inside out. The right pant leg was missing. The material had been shredded by small animals, mice, and birds that used the fabric to build nests. But the left part was preserved well enough to show the main thing. The pants hadn't just been taken off. They had been neatly turned inside out. There were no traces of cat teeth on them. A beige and green fleece jacket was lying there as well. It was well preserved. Several punctures and 2 animal hairs were found on the back, but there were no massive tears on the jacket. The stomach area, where zoologists say pumas usually aim when attacking prey, remained intact. No blood was found on any of the clothing items, neither human nor animal. Forensics admitted that 4 years of rain, snowfall, and temperature fluctuations could have destroyed biological traces. But the fabric was preserved well enough that animal hairs remained on it, and the sneakers looked practically new. The complete absence of blood, given the state of preservation of the other traces, was difficult to explain by weather conditions alone. And the main question concerned the sneakers themselves. If a mountain lion had grabbed the child on the trail and dragged him up the slope, over boulders, fallen logs, and sharp rocks, for a distance of nearly 800 feet up a steep incline, there should have been scratches, scuffs, and drag marks on the soles and sides of the shoes. There were none, not a single one. The sneakers looked as if they had just been taken out of the box and placed on a rock. Moreover, pumas do not undress their prey. Zoologists who have studied mountain lion behavior note that the predator grabs the victim with its teeth and claws, leaving characteristic tears in the fabric, especially in the abdominal and neck areas. An animal is not capable of turning pants inside out, a mechanical movement that requires grabbing the waistband and pulling it over the legs. This action implies the use of hands, the pants, the sneakers, the jacket. Each item individually could have been shoehorned into the predator theory, but all three together formed a picture that contradicted that theory. The discovery of the items brought the case back into an active phase. The Larimer County Sheriff's Office contacted Alan Atadero 2 days after the clothing was found and asked him to identify the items from photographs. The father confirmed they were his son's sneakers, pants, and jacket. The sheriff's office sent a search team to the slope. Rescuers combed the area around the discovery site and expanded the search zone further up the mountain. A few hundred feet from the clothing, even higher up the slope, in a narrow crevice between rocks, they discovered a fragment of a human skull. Separately, on a fallen log nearby, lay a single tooth. Nothing else. Not a single skeletal bone. No limb fragments. No ribs. The entire body of the 3-year-old child, except for a piece of skull bone and one tooth, was missing. The crevice where the remains were found was illuminated by a single thin beam of sunlight filtering through the treetops. The location was so difficult to access that the rescuers spent a significant amount of time just reaching it. 4 years earlier, during the initial search, this zone was not examined. It was too high and too far from the trail to be considered a likely location for the child. In 1999, the rescuers operated on the logic that a 3-year-old boy could have walked down the trail, could have fallen into the river, or could have wandered into the underbrush. He could not have climbed 170 meters vertically up a 45-degree slope littered with rocks and logs. Therefore, they didn't search there, and that is exactly where he was found. DNA analysis showed an 86% probability that the remains belonged to Jared Atadero. There were no characteristic signs of scavenging by a large predator on the skull fragment. No fang indentations or tooth furrows. In October 2003, the Larimer County coroner issued a death certificate for Jared Atadero. The cause was formulated cautiously. Undetermined, puma attack, probable. Not confirmed, not proven, probable. That word carried all the uncertainty the investigation felt. The Sheriff's Department and the Colorado Division of Wildlife held to the mountain lion theory as the most plausible. Pumas do indeed inhabit the area, and attacks on humans, including children, have been documented. Mountain lions drag prey up slopes to hide it from other predators and scavengers. The punctures on the jacket and the animal hair on the fabric fit this picture, but the clean sneakers didn't fit. The inside-out pants didn't fit. The lack of blood on the clothing didn't fit. The absence of predator marks on the skull didn't fit. The complete disappearance of the rest of the skeleton, while a skull fragment and a tooth survived, also found no clear explanation. And the fact that the dogs had lost the scent on a flat section of the trail 4 years earlier and refused to go further remained unanswered. The active phase of the investigation ended. The case was formally closed. The 3-year-old boy who vanished on a mountain trail in October 1999 was officially declared dead, but the death certificate contained no answer to the question of what exactly happened to him. A pair of children's sneakers remained without a single scratch at an elevation a child couldn't have climbed to. Pants turned inside out in a way that's hard to explain by animal behavior. A jacket with punctures, but no massive damage. A skull fragment with no signs of teeth marks. And the silence of the canyon, which held no more answers than it did on the first day of the search. The official version from the investigation was that Jared Atadero was the victim of a mountain lion attack. The Larimer County Sheriff's Office and the Colorado Division of Wildlife agreed on this explanation as the most likely. The arguments were as follows. Mountain lions, or cougars, inhabit the Poudre Canyon area and periodically attack people, including children. A 3-year-old boy weighing 35 pounds represented easy prey, especially for a predator accustomed to hunting fawns and other small animals. A cougar could sneak up on a child silently, kill with a single bite to the base of the skull, and drag the body up the slope to hide it from scavengers and other predators. The punctures on the back of the jacket and animal hair on the fabrics were consistent with this scenario. The remains found high on the slope in a crevice fit the typical behavior of a cougar, hiding prey in a secluded spot. Critics of this version pointed to a number of inconsistencies. Starting with the sneakers, if a cougar had grabbed the child on the trail and dragged him up over rocks and fallen logs for 780 feet along a steep slope, the footwear would inevitably have sustained damage, scuffs from rocks, scratches, and drag marks from the ground. The sneakers were found without a single scratch. One of the searchers described them as being in pristine condition. Furthermore, cougars do not remove footwear from their prey. They grab, drag, and eat. The mechanism by which the sneakers ended up neatly removed and undamaged finds no explanation in known mountain lion behavior. Next, the pants. They were turned completely inside out. To turn pants inside out, you have to grab them by the waistband and pull them through the legs in the opposite direction. This is a mechanical action that requires a certain level of dexterity and effort. A cougar is not capable of this. Its claws and teeth tear fabric. They don't turn it inside out. No characteristic cat tooth marks were found on the pants. The jacket also raised questions. There were punctures on the back, but there were no massive tears, which a cougar usually leaves on the body of its prey, especially in the abdominal and neck areas. The jacket was damaged in specific spots rather than shredded. The absence of blood on all 3 items of clothing, despite the fabric being well preserved enough to detect animal hair, cast doubt on the very fact of a fatal attack at that location. If a cougar had killed the child and then eaten him on the slope, blood should have soaked the clothing. 4 years of precipitation might have weakened the traces, but it would be unusual for it to completely destroy them on fleece fabric, which absorbs and retains liquids. Finally, the skull fragment found in the crevice did not bear the typical signs of being eaten by a large predator. No grooves from teeth, no indentations from fangs. If a cougar had killed the child and eaten him, the skull bones would usually show characteristic damage. The mountain lion theory also failed to explain the behavior of the search dogs. The bloodhounds lost the scent on a flat section of the trail, not leading into the forest or toward the river. If a cougar had dragged the child up the slope, the scent should have led there as well. The dogs did not point toward the slope. They simply stopped. A second theory was put forward primarily by the missing boy's father. Alan Atadero believed from the very beginning that his son had been abducted and murdered by a person. This point of view was shared by independent tracker Rod Laro and researcher David Paulides, author of the Missing 411 series of books and documentaries dedicated to unexplained disappearances in North American national parks. The arguments in favor of this version were based on the same facts that undermined the predator theory. The absence of blood on the items, the sneakers without drag marks, the pants turned inside out by human hands, the lack of scent for the search dogs, which could mean the child was lifted off the ground and carried away without leaving tracks in the soil, and the location of the remains at an elevation where a 3-year-old boy could not have climbed on his own, meaning the body was brought there by someone. Critics of this theory pointed to the geography of the canyon. It has one entrance and one exit by road, and the walls on either side are sheer. That day, members of the group, fishermen, and other tourists were on the trail and in the vicinity, carrying out a silent abduction of a child in broad daylight in the presence of several adults who were 50 to 80 feet behind, and then taking him out of the canyon unnoticed, seemed highly unlikely. The sheriff's office investigated this version and found no evidence to support it. However, supporters of the abduction theory pointed to one fact: the scream. Jared's sister described it as playful, as if someone had run up to him to play tag. If the child saw a stranger and ran to them, mistaking them for a new playmate, that could explain the nature of the scream. A 3-year-old boy wouldn't be afraid of an adult if they were acting friendly. And after that, the voice went silent. There was also a third theory proposed by outside observers and commentators: an attack by a large bird of prey. According to this hypothesis, a large eagle could have lifted the child into the air, which would explain the punctures on the back of the jacket from talons, the lack of ground tracks, and the scent trail ending for the dogs. The bird could have gotten tired and dropped the prey on the slope. The child, from shock or hypothermia, could have removed some of his own clothing, turning the pants inside out in the process, before perishing. This version was not supported by the official investigation. Zoologists noted that even the largest eagles in North America, bald eagles and golden eagles, are capable of lifting prey weighing no more than 11 to 13 pounds. Jared weighed 35 pounds. No North American bird could physically lift him into the air and carry him a significant distance. Furthermore, the theory did not explain why the sneakers were undamaged. A bird holding a child with its talons would inevitably have left marks on the footwear when grabbing or dropping him. Each of the three theories answered part of the questions and left another part unanswered. The cougar theory explained the location of the remains on the slope, but did not explain the condition of the clothing. The abduction theory explained the condition of the clothing, but did not explain how a kidnapper could have acted unnoticed in a canyon with only one exit. The bird theory explained the broken scent trail, but did not hold up to the laws of physics. None of the versions were either confirmed or definitively refuted, and none explained all the facts at once. Clean sneakers without scratches on a slope where a 3-year-old child could not have climbed himself. Pants turned inside out by a mechanical movement that implies the presence of hands. A jacket with punctures but no massive tears. A skull fragment with no signs of teeth. One tooth on a log. The rest of the body, all the bones, were missing. Dogs that lost the trail on a flat path. And a playful scream that held no fear. The investigation settled on the cougar theory, not because it explained everything, but because it seemed the least impossible of those available. After the case was closed in 2003, Poudre Canyon returned to its normal life. The Big South Trail continued to welcome tourists. The river flowed in the same channel. The slopes stood in their places. But for those connected to the case, nothing in that life was normal anymore. Alan Atadero turned his tragedy into work. He didn't shut down or back away. Together with his daughter Jocelyn, he began pushing for the adoption of an emergency alert system for missing children in Colorado, which by that time already existed in several states under the name Amber Alert. In 2002, Colorado signed the corresponding law. Alan became one of the people responsible for bringing this tool to the state. He founded a project called the Jared Atadero Whistle. The idea was simple. Every child heading out on a trail should carry a whistle. If they get lost, the sound of a whistle carries further through the mountains than a child's voice, and rescuers will be able to hear it. Whistles were handed out at events, in schools, and at the entrances to national parks. Alan gave lectures, telling Jared's story and explaining safety rules in nature. Travel with someone, report your route, wear bright clothing, and keep children in sight. He repeated these words hundreds of times in different auditoriums, year after year. In 2000, Congressman Tom Tancredo introduced a bill in the House of Representatives to dedicate the Big South Trail to the memory of Jared Atadero. President Clinton signed it. The trail received a second name, the Jared Atadero Legacy Trail. At the trailhead, they installed a sign with safety rules for children in nature and a photograph of the boy. Colorado Governor Bill Ritter proclaimed an outdoor safety week dedicated to Jared's memory. The campaign urged parents to dress their children in bright clothing, provide them with whistles, and always report their exact route to rescue services. At home, Alan kept his son's room untouched. The toys lay exactly as the 3-year-old boy had left them. A teddy bear sat on the bed. Books stood on the shelf. When the remains were found in 2003, the father placed the skull fragment on top of Jared's favorite toys, next to an Oakland Raiders baseball cap. He refused cremation. For him, this was not an artifact from a criminal case, but a part of his child that had returned home. He later said, "I have found peace, and I know that one day I will see Jared again. I will look at him and say, 'Jared, what happened?' And he will look at me and say, 'Dad, does it really matter?'" The Jared Atadero case did not disappear from the public space after it was closed. On the contrary, it continued to gather new layers. Alan, together with his twin brother Arlen, wrote a book about his son's disappearance. It was released under the title Missing: When the Sun Sets, and was later republished. It described in detail the events of that day, the progress of the search, the conflict with the sheriff's office, and the inner world of a father trying to reconcile his faith with his loss. In 2016, the case was featured in the documentary Missing 411, based on the books by David Paulides. Paulides, a former police officer and independent researcher, collected data on unexplained disappearances in North American national parks and forests. He noted a series of recurring elements in these cases: search dogs losing the scent, remains or clothing found in places the missing person could not have reached on their own, and inexplicably clean belongings. The Jared Atadero case matched this pattern on almost every point. The film gained widespread reach and attracted a new audience to the case, including people far from Colorado and the original circle of interested parties. Over the years, an online community formed that continued to discuss the case. Podcasts, forums, and blogs returned to it again and again. In 2024, for the 25th anniversary of the disappearance, several major Colorado publications released retrospective pieces. Every discussion hit the same dead end: sneakers without a scratch, pants turned inside out, and a total absence of blood. No new evidence emerged. No new theories capable of explaining all the facts simultaneously appeared either. For some, the Jared Atadero case became a symbol of a failed search operation. They started too late, lost time due to a helicopter crash, and didn't allow volunteers to help. For others, it became an example of how the wilderness holds mysteries to which humans have no answer. For a third group, those who followed Paulides' work, it stood among a series of unexplained disappearances, united by common traits but lacking a common explanation. Alan Atadero continued to work in education. He taught for 35 years, received a Teacher of the Year award in Colorado, and then moved to Ohio, where he became the principal of a Christian school in Middletown. He married a second time, to a woman named Deborah. Jocelyn grew up and got married. Alan had grandchildren. Life went on, but the shadow of Poudre Canyon remained. Every year on October 2nd, he remembered that day. Every time someone asked about Jared, he told the story all over again, patiently, without anger, like a man who had long ago accepted what he could not change, but had never stopped thinking about it. In October 2024, for the 25th anniversary of the disappearance, Alan gave an interview in which he said, "Jared didn't disappear for nothing. He disappeared to help others." He was referring to Amber Alerts, whistles, and safety laws. It was the meaning he found in his loss. It wasn't an attempt to justify what happened, but an attempt to live with it. On April 15th, 2025, Alan Atadero passed away at his home in Miamisburg, Ohio. He was 67 years old. The death was unexpected. His twin brother, Arlen, who had retired to Fort Collins, not far from that very canyon, said that Alan always knew that one day he would meet Jared again. For 26 years, a father waited for an answer to what happened to his son. He died without ever getting one. The Big South Trail remains open to this day. It starts at the highway, follows the Poudre River, and climbs into the subalpine zone of the Arapaho and Roosevelt National Forest. At the trailhead, there is a sign with safety rules and a photograph of a 3-year-old boy in a beige and green jacket. His name is written next to the photo. The paint has faded slightly, but the face in the picture is still clear. Chestnut hair, brown eyes, and a slight smile. Further up the trail, 1.5 miles from the start, there is a turn at the second campsite where 2 fishermen heard a question about bears in October 1999. The fishermen still come here to catch trout. The river sounds just as it did back then, the low, steady noise of water over stones. The slopes rise on both sides, covered in granite and fallen timber. In the autumn, the air here is cool and smells of pine needles. 550 feet above the trail, on a steep 45-degree slope, there are no markings, no plaque, no cross, no stone. Nothing indicates that a pair of children's sneakers without a single scratch, pants turned inside out, and a skull fragment were once found here in a crevice lit by a single ray of sun. The cause of Jared Atadero's death is officially listed as undetermined. A 3-year-old boy walked down the trail, asked some fishermen about bears, and never returned. What happened between his final question and the moment his sneakers were found on a slope he couldn't have climbed, nobody knows. Above 10,000 feet, a cotton t-shirt becomes a death sentence. During the day, it soaks up sweat and refuses to dry. At night, when temperatures plummet toward freezing, the wet fabric leaches heat from the body, faster than the open air. Mountaineers call cotton the fabric of death. On July 19, 1991, 12-year-old Boy Scout Jared Negrete climbed toward the summit of Mount San Gorgonio, the highest point of Southern California, wearing a cotton t-shirt and light pants. It was his first ever overnight hike and his death warrant. They searched for him for 16 days. 270 people, Marines, helicopters with thermal imaging, and search dogs. They found nothing. Jared Michael Negrete was 12 years old. He was less than 2 months away from his 13th birthday. He lived in El Monte, a small city east of Los Angeles, with his parents, Felipe and Linda, his brother Ramon, and his sister April. The family were members of their local Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints congregation, and it was through the church that Jared joined a scout troop shortly before that summer. Those who knew him described a shy but friendly boy. He was in the 8th grade, wore brown plastic-rimmed glasses, and had a small birthmark on his right cheek. Standing 5'2", he weighed about 150 pounds. He had a stocky build and low endurance. Jared wasn't an athletic kid, and long hikes were a struggle for him. But he wanted to be part of the troop, wanted to be among his peers, and when the hike to San Gorgonio was announced, he signed up. This was meant to be his first overnight trip in the wilderness, his first real test, Mount San Gorgonio, which locals call Old Greyback, rises to 11,503 feet. It is the only mountain in Southern California whose summit rises significantly above the tree line. In summer, it looks deceptively calm. Gentle contours, gray stone, thinning forest. From a distance, the mountain looks like a low hill stretched across the horizon. But above 9,000 feet, the terrain changes character. The ground turns into loose granite scree, unstable boulders, and rock slides. Trails wind above cliffs that drop 600 feet, and the lower parts of the canyons are choked with dense chaparral, thick, rigid brush that is impossible to pass through and impossible to see into. The air at this altitude is thin, and the body tires significantly faster than it does below. Search and rescue specialist Francis Lawson, who worked on the mountain, later put it succinctly: "As long as you're on the trail, there are no problems. But the moment you step off, you could be swept away by a rock slide." On July 18, 1991, a group of 14 boys and their leader, Scoutmaster Dennis Knight, set out from Camp Taquitz in the southern part of the San Bernardino Mountains. The route led to the summit via the Vivian Creek Trail, a round trip of about 18 miles. By evening, the group reached an intermediate camp at Dry Lake, a dried-up lake about a mile north of the summit. Here, at an altitude of about 9,800 feet, they set up tents and spent the night. The air was already noticeably thin, and breathing with every movement became slightly shorter than usual. On the morning of July 19th, 6 boys, including Jared, set out with Knight to storm the summit. Heavy backpacks weighing between 30 and 40 pounds each were left at camp. The boys carried only water and food. Jared had a 2-quart blue canteen and a disposable Kodak camera. He was wearing green scout trousers, a light cotton t-shirt, and black high-top Pro Wings sneakers. For a walk in a city park, this clothing would have been more than enough. For an altitude of 10,000 feet, where nighttime temperatures dropped to freezing, it was inadequate. Ahead lay about 5 miles of climbing along the sky-high trail above the tree line, where granite grit crunched underfoot and the wind carried fine dust across the exposed ridge. The group moved quickly. The older boys, according to some reports, turned it into something of a race to the summit. The pace increased, and Jared began to fall behind. His stocky build, lack of experience, and the thin air were working against him. With every turn of the trail, the distance between him and the backs of the others grew. At some point, he lost sight of the group ahead. The trail wound in switchbacks up the slope. Switchbacks, zigzag sections of a path, allow for gaining altitude gradually without scrambling directly up the steep terrain. For an experienced hiker, this is an obvious necessity. For a 12-year-old boy who had fallen behind, every extra turn looked like a waste of time, and Jared began to cut them. Trying to close the gap, he stepped off the beaten path and walked straight across the rocky slope, where gravel shifted under his feet, and there was nothing to grab onto in case of a fall. Other hikers on the trail noticed the straggling boy. They reached the summit and informed Scoutmaster Knight that one of his charges was far behind, alone, and cutting the switchbacks. Knight, by all accounts, replied that he would pick Jared up on the way back. The Scoutmaster did not register this hike with the Scout organization's office, which was a violation of protocol. There was no second adult leader in the group. The buddy system, where every scout is paired with a specific comrade and no one is left alone, was not used by the troop that day. Around 11:30 a.m., the group reached the planned point of the route. Jared was not among them. One of the older boys went back down the trail and walked a distance along it. He did not find the boy. By 1 p.m., the entire group began to descend, searching the area on both sides of the trail. By 2 p.m., the disappearance was reported to the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. While the group was searching for Jared at the top, he was still alive. At 6 p.m., 4 hours after the search began, a firefighter from Santa Ana, an experienced hiker walking the Vivian Creek Trail, spotted the boy at an altitude of approximately 10,200 feet. Jared was walking alone. He looked tired and disoriented, and was again trying to cut the switchbacks. The firefighter stopped him and warned him, "Don't cut the corners. Stay on the trail. It's dangerous." Exactly what Jared replied is not recorded in the sources, but the firefighter saw an exhausted 12-year-old boy in light clothing, alone, at 10,000 feet, toward evening. He gave him the warning and continued on. Later, when shown a photograph, he identified Jared. This was the last confirmed sighting of Jared Negrete. No one ever saw him again. That same evening, Scoutmaster Knight hiked 12 miles in the dark to reach the nearest communication point and report the disappearance. Rangers began combing the area around the trail, but around 8 p.m., visibility dropped, and the search had to be halted until dawn. Night fell over San Gorgonio. The temperature dropped to freezing. Somewhere on the slope, in the dark, at 10,000 feet, a 12-year-old boy in a cotton t-shirt was left alone. At dawn on July 20th, helicopters rose over San Gorgonio. By 7 a.m., the search and rescue operation was in full swing. Rangers from the San Bernardino National Forest hit the trail first, even before the sun reached the canyon floors. Behind them came sheriff's deputies, horse patrols, and volunteers from surrounding towns. By noon, dozens of people were working on the mountain. By the end of the first day, their number had exceeded 100. In El Monte, 37 miles to the west, Felipe and Linda Negrete learned that their son had not returned from the trail. They arrived at the foot of the mountain and remained there throughout the operation. Linda later recalled that in the first few days, she believed Jared was alive, that he was simply lost and waiting for help. There was water on the mountain, daytime temperatures were tolerable, and he had food. Hope held on to these facts. Rescuers also believed there was a chance. Authorities told the press that there were enough streams and springs on the mountain, and that daytime temperatures allowed one to survive for several days without shelter. The key factor remained the night. At 10,000 feet, in a cotton t-shirt, without a sleeping bag or a fire, every night was an ordeal that a healthy adult might not survive. With each passing day, the scale of the search grew. By July 22nd, up to 270 people were heading out onto San Gorgonio daily. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department coordinated the work from a headquarters in Angeles Oaks, a small village at the foot of the mountain. Marines from the El Toro and 29 Palms bases joined in. 5, sometimes 6 helicopters, including 3 military ones, circled above the slopes, conducting aerial surveillance. Infrared scanners and thermal imagers capable of detecting the heat of a living body through tree canopies and brush were set up at high altitude points. K-9 units led search dogs along the trails and along creek beds. Sheriff's Department spokesperson Tanya Cahill told reporters at the time, "We are not just going to stop searching. There is someone's child out there." The search area covered 45 square miles of mountainous terrain, an area comparable to a small city. Rescuers worked in sectors, combing square by square. Every morning, shifts left headquarters, climbed the slope, and were distributed to assigned areas. Foot chains moved across the slopes, lined up within arm's reach of each other, examining every bush, every crevice, every rock overhang. Horse patrols climbed the ridges, which offered a view of the canyons below. Helicopters descended into gorges where foot groups couldn't pass, and pilots peered into the thickets, looking for a splash of colored clothing against the gray and green background. The terrain fought back. Loose granite grit gave way underfoot, and rescuers kept slipping on steep sections. Unstable boulders that looked secure shifted at the first touch, sending cascades of small rocks tumbling down. The chaparral in the lower parts of the canyons stood like a wall as tall as a person, and it could only be passed with a machete. Slowly, meter by meter, blindly. Rain that had fallen the day before washed out parts of the trails and made the rocks slippery. Cliffs up to 600 feet deep appeared suddenly, around a bend, behind a bush, or past a rock ledge. During the operation, rescuers sustained 44 injuries. Fractures, sprains, and cuts from rock slides and falls on scree slopes. The mountain where they were searching for a 12-year-old boy was maiming those who had come to save him. The infrared scanners, which had been the subject of such high hopes, only picked up small wildlife, squirrels, rabbits, and lizards. Nothing larger, no humans, no large predators. The dogs led along the trails and creek beds couldn't pick up a solid scent. The trail would vanish on rocky patches where there was no soft soil to hold the scent molecules. Every day that began with hope ended the same way. Nothing. The teams would return to base by evening, mark the searched squares on the map, and head off to rest. In the morning, they would head out again. The territory marked with red lines on the command maps kept growing, yet there were no results. On July 26th, a week after the disappearance, Linda Negrete told reporters, "Sometimes I ask God if we should still have hope. I've thought about everything that could have happened, but I have faith in God and in Jared. I know he is alive." As the days turned into a week, the search zone began to shrink. First to 22 square miles, then to 4, along the south fork of the Whitewater River, a dry creek bed that winds along the canyon floor below the trail. The logic was simple. If the boy had fallen from the slope, his body and belongings should have ended up down below, near the water. If he had been walking on his own, he would also have headed down toward the water, because that's what lost people do. In total, over the course of the 16-day operation, more than 2,000 people took part in the search. While combing the area, rescuers discovered an illegal marijuana plantation in a remote part of the canyon, but they didn't find a single trace leading to Jared Negrete. The first findings appeared on the third day. On July 21st, rescuers discovered sneaker prints at an altitude of about 10,000 feet on the mountain's southwest slope. The tread pattern matched the Pro Wings sneakers Jared had been wearing. The tracks led along a rocky section away from the main trail, heading in a direction that didn't match any marked route. Then, they vanished on solid ground where the granite wouldn't hold an impression. The dogs couldn't track any further. The trackers circled the point where the prints ended, expanding the radius, but found no continuation. On July 24th, the very same firefighter from Santa Ana who had last seen Jared joined the search. He climbed the mountain with the rescue team and pointed out the exact spot of the encounter on the Vivian Creek Trail at an altitude of about 10,200 feet. This gave the search teams a new starting point, a specific location where the boy was definitely alive at 6 p.m. on July 19th. They began to comb the area around it in expanding circles. On July 27th, 8 days after the disappearance, a disposable Kodak camera was found under a bush off the Vivian Creek Trail. According to various sources, the camera was lying between 45 and 200 feet from the trail. Nearby, wrappers from beef jerky and fruit snacks were scattered on the ground. The wrappers meant the boy had stopped in this spot to eat, which meant he was still capable of acting rationally. Sheriff's Deputy Bill Lemieux commented on the find. The wrappers, which the boy likely discarded on the very first day after getting lost, provided a direction for the search. The film was developed. It contained 12 shots taken on the day he disappeared. The first frames were landscapes, mountains, slopes, rocky ridges, and the sky above the tree line. Ordinary photos that any boy with a camera might take on his first mountain hike. Jared was photographing what he saw around him and the first few frames showed no signs of distress or panic. But the final shots in the series showed places that don't exist on any known trail. Not on Vivian Creek, not on Sky High, not on any other marked route in the area. The landscape in these frames didn't match what hikers see while walking the marked trails to the summit. Jared was photographing terrain where he was already alone and from which he would not return. The camera was a disposable film model with a limited number of frames. Every click of the shutter was a choice, what to capture before the film ran out, and Jared chose the mountains he saw around him, until the very end, and on the 12th, final frame, taken with a flash in total darkness, was his face, a close-up. Only his eyes and nose were visible. All around, blackness. A disposable camera flash only works for a few feet and lasts a fraction of a second. After that flash, darkness returned, and the film was finished. What was he trying to do? Light his way with the only flash he had? Send a light signal to rescuers who didn't even exist yet on that first evening? Or capture himself, just to leave an imprint in the dark because there was nothing else left to do? There is no answer. There's only the photograph. Separately, about half a mile from the main trail, they found Jared's backpack. Inside were clothes, uneaten beef jerky, and candy. A supply of food that could have kept the boy going for several days. The backpack was undamaged. No signs of a struggle were found nearby. No claw marks, no torn fabric, no trampled earth. The boy, by all appearances, had discarded it himself and continued on light. Yet, he kept the camera with him. He ditched the food and clothes, but not the camera. A blue water canteen was mentioned among the items found, though its exact location was not recorded in official reports. With every new fact, the picture didn't become clearer. It became more dense. There were more questions than answers, and every discovery gave rise to new ones. The sneaker prints were found at 10,000 feet, but the firefighter had seen Jared on the Vivian Creek Trail at 10,200 feet. This meant that after meeting the firefighter, the boy didn't go higher, but began to descend. But the camera and wrappers were lying off the Vivian Creek Trail, and the backpack was even further away. He didn't just descend, and he didn't just wander off the trail. He was moving deeper and deeper into the wilderness, where there were no markings or beaten paths. The photos on the camera confirmed this. The landscapes Jared shot didn't match any section of the route the group had taken. He was photographing places he had wandered into after getting lost. And yet, he didn't throw the camera away, nor did he leave it in the backpack when he abandoned it. He carried it with him until darkness, until the moment he used the flash and photographed his own face. The backpack, found half a mile from the trail, posed a separate question. Why did he abandon it? Inside was food that could have extended his life for several days, clothing that could have been useful at night. The logic of a lost person suggests carrying everything with you. But Jared was 12 years old. He was exhausted. And the backpack, even lightened, might have felt like an unbearable burden on a slope where every step required effort. The thermal imagers, which had been in use since the first days of the search, didn't record a single heat signature on the slopes corresponding to the size of a human, only small animals. This could mean that by the time the infrared surveillance was deployed, Jared was no longer emitting heat, or that he was in a place the scanners couldn't reach, under a rock overhang, in a crevice, or deep in the chaparral where the dense vegetation absorbed the signal. The theory of an animal attack, a bear or a mountain lion, was investigated and not confirmed. Both live in the San Bernardino Mountains. But rescuers found no blood, no torn clothing, no fur, no claw marks, and no signs of a confrontation whatsoever. Jared's belongings lay as if he had placed them there himself, neatly, without signs of panic. The theory of a fall remained. The cliffs on San Gorgonio reached depths of 600 feet. The canyons below are overgrown with such dense chaparral that a person who fell there could be invisible from just a few feet away. A body at the bottom of such a canyon could remain undiscovered for years or decades. This was the rescuers' working hypothesis. The boy wandered off the trail, slipped on granite scree, and fell in a spot that search teams couldn't inspect due to the terrain. But the camera was lying up above, near the trail, and the backpack was also up above, though further from the route. If he fell into the canyon, it happened after he had gotten rid of his things and traveled some distance further. He was traveling light. He was heading somewhere. He was still moving when it got dark, and in the dark, he photographed his own face. There was one more fact that didn't fit into any theory entirely. Authorities stated that there was enough water on the mountain to survive. Creeks, springs, tributaries of the Whitewater. If Jared had found water and shelter from the night cold, he could have lived for several days. But then the search teams, who were combing the creek bed specifically, should have found him. Dead or alive, they found neither. The body was never found. In an area of 45 square miles, combed by over 2,000 people from the air and on the ground with dogs and thermal imagers, there were no bones, no fragments of clothing, and nothing else that could indicate exactly where Jared Negrete stopped moving. On August 4th, 1991, 16 days after the start of the full-scale operation, San Bernardino County authorities officially announced the end of active searching. The chances of survival were called virtually zero. A boy in a cotton t-shirt had spent 16 nights on the mountain, if he had even survived the first one. The decision was difficult, but it was based on grounds that could not be ignored. There were 44 injuries among the rescuers: broken ankles on scree, lacerations from falling rocks, sprains on slippery slopes. The operation had become too dangerous for those conducting it. A 12-year-old boy without gear, without shelter, and without warm clothing could not have survived at 10,000 feet for 16 days. The rescuers understood this. The parents, standing at the foot of the mountain, refused to believe it. The base in Angeles Oaks was dismantled. Equipment was hauled out. The helicopters left. The horse patrols headed down. Sporadic checks from the air and with dogs continued for a few more days, but the full-scale operation was over. Silence returned to San Gorgonio, and with it, the mountain's ordinary life. Tourists, trails, and the wind on the ridge. Jared's father, Felipe Negrete, appealed to the governor of California and the president with a request to resume the search. He received no answer that could change anything. On September 7th, 1991, a memorial service was held at a Mormon church in Hacienda Heights. About 500 people attended: relatives, family friends, fellow scouts, and church parishioners. They stood in a hall that contained neither a coffin nor an urn. There was only a photograph of the boy in glasses and his name. Linda Negrete, Jared's mother, would later say in an interview, "I have nothing. I don't even have a grave. The case of Jared Negrete remains unsolved. There are only theories, and none of them explain everything." The official position of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department was that it was an accident. According to this theory, Jared wandered off the trail while trying to cut through the switchbacks, strayed into the wilderness, and died of hypothermia or dehydration. The facts supporting this theory were compelling. The boy was inexperienced. This was his first overnight hike, and he lacked both physical conditioning and orienteering skills. He was wearing a cotton t-shirt and light pants, clothing unsuitable for spending the night at an altitude of 10,000 feet, where temperatures dropped to freezing after sunset. He was alone, without a map, a compass, or any means of communication. His belongings were found away from the trail, which confirms he had indeed gone off route. A camera containing photos of locations that didn't match any trail suggested the same. Jared was disoriented, and walking where no one should be. At an altitude of 10,000 feet, the body of a 12-year-old boy, tired from a day of hiking, burned energy faster than usual. The thin air increased his fatigue. Cotton fabric, soaked with sweat, sapped his body heat. Without shelter, fire, or warm clothing, the very first night could have led to hypothermia, a condition where body temperature drops below a critical point and a person loses the ability to move or think. But this theory had a gap that could not be closed. The body was never found. 45 square miles, combed by more than 2,000 people with thermal imagers, dogs, and helicopters, yielded no bones, no fragments of clothing, and no remains of any kind. If the boy had died of cold on an open slope, search teams should have found him. If he had died in a sheltered spot, under a canopy or in a crevice, thermal imagers should have detected his body heat while it was still present. That didn't happen. The theory of a fall into an inaccessible canyon was considered the most likely explanation for the missing body. The cliffs on San Gorgonio reach up to 600 feet. The lower parts of the canyons are so densely overgrown with chaparral that a person who ends up there becomes invisible from just a few feet away. Rescuers admitted that not all parts of the mountain could be searched. Some canyons were too dangerous to descend into, and helicopters could not get low enough to look under the brush canopy. If Jared had slipped on loose granite and fallen into one of these canyons, his body could have remained there for decades, hidden by the vegetation and the terrain. Critics of this theory pointed to the location of the items found. The camera and wrappers were lying near the trail, the backpack half a mile away. All of this was found at high altitude, not down at the bottom of a canyon. If the boy fell, it happened after he had dropped his backpack and walked some distance with the camera in his hands. He was still moving when it got dark. He was still capable of picking up the camera and pressing the button. The theory of an animal attack was investigated and dismissed. Black bears and mountain lions inhabit the San Bernardino Mountains, and both species are capable of attacking a human. However, an attack by a large predator leaves traces: blood, torn clothing, fur, claw marks, drag marks. Nothing of the sort was found. The backpack was intact, the clothes inside were folded, and the food wrappers were not scattered in the way they would be if an animal had gotten to the food. There was also a kidnapping theory. According to one hypothesis, Jared could have descended the slope to one of the forest roads running along the lower part of the mountain and been picked up or abducted by an unknown driver. In November 1991, one of the detectives working on the case publicly stated that, in his opinion, the boy had been kidnapped. Later, in August 1992, a private investigator claimed to have leads pointing to a kidnapping, possibly linked to human trafficking. These statements were published in the press and sparked a wave of discussion, but the police found no evidence. The site of the disappearance was deep in the national forest, at an altitude of 10,000 feet, far from any roads. No tire tracks were found on the dirt roads near the trail. There were no witnesses who had seen suspicious cars or strangers in the area. The inaccessibility of the terrain made a kidnapping logistically almost impossible, although this theory could not be completely ruled out. Trails in Southern California's national forests are used by more than just hikers. Separately, the investigation checked the scout troop leaders. Scoutmaster Dennis Knight and other leaders were found guilty of safety violations. The hike had not been registered with the organization's office. There was no second adult in the group, and the buddy system was not used. Some participants in online discussions in later years expressed suspicions about the leader's own involvement in the disappearance. However, the police conducted an investigation and found neither criminal intent nor any evidence of harm caused. No charges were filed against anyone. Jared's parents, Felipe and Linda, publicly stated that they did not blame the troop leader. They wanted only one thing: to find their son. Each theory explained some of the facts while leaving others unanswered. The accident theory explained why the boy left the trail, but not why the body wasn't found. The canyon fall theory explained the missing body, but not why the belongings were left up high. The kidnapping theory explained the absence of the body and belongings at the top, but not how a kidnapper could have been at an altitude of 10,000 feet. An animal attack was not supported by anything. And then there was the 12th frame, the boy's face in the dark, captured with a flash on the last frame of the film. This photograph neither confirmed nor refuted any theory, but it made each of them heavier, because it showed a living child, alone, in the dark, on a mountain that would not let him go. After the active phase of the search was closed, the Jared Negrete case was moved to the cold case category. The file was placed on a shelf in the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department archives. Periodic aerial and K9 searches were conducted for a while longer, but it was no longer a systematic effort. Newspapers that had covered the disappearance throughout July and early August moved on to other topics. Jared's name vanished from the front pages, from the evening broadcasts, and from the short notes on the inside pages. By the fall of 1991, he was remembered only by those who were personally affected. The incident, however, left a systemic mark. The Boy Scouts of America conducted an internal investigation into the circumstances of the hike and revised safety rules for group wilderness outings. A mandatory buddy system was introduced, where each scout is paired with a specific companion, and no one is left on the trail alone under any circumstances. A trailing leader rule was implemented. An adult leader always walks at the back of the column to ensure no participant falls behind or gets lost from sight. Requirements for the minimum number of adults in a group and mandatory registration for every hike were tightened in scout troop training documents. The disappearance of Jared Negrete is still cited as an example of a mistake that must not be repeated. One boy was lost, but the rules introduced after his disappearance have, in all likelihood, saved the lives of others. Scoutmaster Dennis Knight did not give public interviews after the events on San Gorgonio. His name remained in the case files, in newspaper articles, and in internal audit reports, but he never publicly shared his own version of what happened on the trail on July 19th. The Negrete family tried to move on. Felipe and Linda moved from El Monte to Walnut, a small city in the same Los Angeles County. They adopted 2 children, trying to fill the silence that hung in the house after Jared. Linda later said that no child can replace another, but a house shouldn't be that empty. Jared's brother, Ramon, and sister, April, grew up in a family where one name was never spoken in the past tense, because the body had not been found, and that meant there was no closure. Mount San Gorgonio continued to live its own life. Hikers climbed to the summit along the same trails Jared had walked. The switchbacks wound along the same slopes. The wind carried the same granite dust across the open ridge, and the mountain continued to take people. In the years and decades that followed, other hikers, experienced and inexperienced, prepared and accidental, died or got lost on San Gorgonio. Some were found alive after days of wandering the slopes. Some were found dead. Some were not found at all. San Gorgonio had not changed. It remained what it was, the highest point in Southern California, deceptively calm in appearance and indifferent to those who climb it. 10 years after Jared's disappearance, a 16-year-old teenager named William Parwin went missing on the same mountain. The news reached the Negrete family, and an old wound was reopened. Another boy, on the same mountain, lost on the same trails. For Felipe and Linda, it was not just a coincidence. It was a reminder that San Gorgonio does not let go. Felipe Negrete made a decision he had been contemplating for years. In 2001, 10 years after that July day, he climbed San Gorgonio and walked the route where his son had been lost. The The father walked along the Vivian Creek Trail, past the switchbacks, past the rock slides, past the point where a firefighter had last seen Jared. He saw the same rocks, the same chaparral, the same gray granite under his feet. He felt the same thin air that takes your breath away. Felipe later said that on the trail, he felt his son's presence. It didn't bring answers, but it gave him something nothing else could, a physical sense of the place where Jared had been for the last time. A sense of what the world looks like if you are a 12-year-old boy, you are tired, you are alone, and the trail leads upward. In 2001, Linda Negrete gave an in-depth interview to the Los Angeles Times to mark the 10th anniversary of his disappearance. She spoke of 10 years without answers, of a hope that neither fades nor finds confirmation, and of a home where there is always an empty seat at the table. She spoke of how she still wonders who Jared would have become had he grown up. He would be 22. He could have finished college, started a family, become anyone. Instead, he remained a 12-year-old boy in a photograph, forever. 2 more decades have passed since then. No new evidence has emerged. No bones, no fragments of clothing, no items that could be linked to Jared. Amateur sleuths have climbed San Gorgonio, hiked the same trails, photographed the terrain, and compared their shots to the frames from Jared's camera. They looked for landscape matches, trying to pinpoint where his scenic photos were taken to reconstruct the route he followed after getting lost. Some claim to have found similar views, but confirming a match proved impossible. The slopes of San Gorgonio all look alike: gray granite, brush, and sky. No one found anything. The mountain kept what it took. In the 2020s, Jared Negrete's story experienced a second wave of attention. True crime podcasts dedicated episodes to it. Cold and Missing in 2024. Bedtime Stories in 2025. Documentary videos appeared on YouTube, racking up hundreds of thousands of views. On forums and in comment sections, people discussed theories, analyzed photos, and mapped out routes on satellite imagery, trying to understand where a 12-year-old boy with a disposable camera could have gone. The 12th frame, a face in the dark, became one of the most recognizable images in the genre of unsolved disappearances. The case officially remains open. Jared Negrete is listed in the National NamUs database as a missing person at risk, as well as in the California Department of Justice registry. Dental records are kept for potential identification. The Sheriff's Department phone number for tips is still listed on his case file. If Jared were alive today, he would be 47 years old. Mount San Gorgonio stands where it has always stood, 11,503 feet, the highest point in Southern California. Gray stone, thinning forest, and granite scree above the tree line. On weekends, hikers arrive, strap on their backpacks, and head up the switchbacks. Most return. The Vivian Creek Trail still leads to the summit. It winds along the same slopes, past the same boulders, over the same canyons choked with chaparral. Somewhere along its curves, at an elevation of 10,170 feet, is the spot that a Santa Ana firefighter pointed out to search teams in July 1991. Nothing marks this place. No plaque, no sign, no cross. Only rocks, brush, and the trail leading upward. This is where the firefighter last saw the boy in glasses, wearing a cotton t-shirt with a camera in his hands. The boy was walking alone and cutting across the switchbacks. He was told, "Stay on the trail." He kept going. In the police archives lie the developed photos from his camera. 11 landscapes and 1 face in the dark. 12 frames. 12 pieces of evidence that Jared Negrete was alive, moving, and seeing the mountains around him on that final day. He photographed what he saw, and then night fell, and he pressed the button one last time. Where he went after the flash faded, No one knows.